Now, this was one of those strange experiences. It's not mine, but not quite not mine. It was my brother. I had a series of letters from him around Christmas. I and my wife were in our lovely, lovely rectory with our 2 young children, and we were expecting him to turn up when the first letter arrived, with an apology. On the 24th of December we got it. Almost too late to do anything about it, I muttered to myself. Apparently, our Uncle Henry, now, he is the wealthy uncle. He was a clergyman of sorts, if such a brighter name could be given to such a termagant, in some parish in the home counties. He'd been there nearly 35 years. They couldn't get rid of him, and he couldn't go anywhere else. And it was always a slight open question how many of the 39 articles he still believed in, but he made a living, and what was more, he sat upon the family treasure, being the eldest son of the eldest son and all that. So I quite approved of my brother going. He wrote to me that he was going to send me a draft, which he did, and there was no hope that he would turn up, but very little, and he would telegraph me if he was coming. So I told our children, who are fond of their uncle, although to be honest with you, not getting home a present, and so saving their pennies, was some recompense. But I was worried, because he was having to travel in the snow to that rectory in the wilds of Surrey, down in the deep woods beyond Cobham. And the snow was thick that year. It was cold, and my uncle's house had never been modernised. It had electric, but it was installed in the 1970s, and so rudimentary. But I thought no more of it, and determined just to enjoy Christmas. The next letter I got arrived 27th, as you might expect, but it was dated the 24th. In the first opening paragraph, he laments that he is not going to be able to come. That much was obvious, obviously. And then he tells me of his search for our uncle, how they had given up looking for him amongst the living, but were now thinking of him as amongst the dead. Of all the ponds that they were scouring, to no avail. Of how half the county was looking through the snow, but no tracks could be found leading from the house or in the open countryside. He wore peculiar shoes. You would have thought they would have been able to find them. Now, my brother was not staying at my uncle's house. It was a great relief to me to know. He was staying with an old-style pub, and with such a barman, he said, only Dickens could describe adequately. He was all pomposity and arrogance and stupidity, and seemed to have too much of the beer himself. On the very first night, my brother wrote, he asked mine good host, whose name was Mr. Baxter, whether he liked my uncle. And Mr. Baxter said, well, for my part, I might have liked him once, but when you quarrel about a firkin, which is clearly nobody's responsibility, and so you'll never see him again, and you won't pay, and you'll tell your parishioners not to come to the pub, well, then I don't know whether I like you or not anymore. And Mr. Baxter, suddenly realising what he said and worrying, as if it might be a provocation, a reason, a motive, as my brother writes, he might have called it, suddenly started to say complimentary things about my uncle, how he was a hard man, but a fair man, how he kept in the tenets of the church, whatever they might be. Until my brother begged him to stop, fearing for his sanity. He also writes that the housekeeper was heartbroken, for she came as close as you could do to loving such a martinet as our uncle. Not close, but she would miss him. of how the house had not been cared for, how the roof leaked, how damp and snow seemed to come in through the windows, of the cold of the place, of its unwelcome, of the black snow, of the black trees poking out from the snow that slid off them now as some kind of thaw was in. But everywhere, that chill, grey chill, and nights that were not quite dark, for the lamps lit the grey snow, so it looked like a kingdom of the dead. He writes also how the landlord would insist on joining the investigations to keep, my brother thought, him from suspicion. And he would go and talk to everybody, almost every passing dog, and investigate them and ask them thoroughly about what they knew about our Uncle Henry. And at the end of these investigations of these poor innocents who could clearly have nothing to do with it, he would come and say, "Well, I think we can rule them out of our inquiry, sir. They have nothing to be doing about it. I'm on my oath that that is true." And then my brother signed off, and I waited. And sure enough, the next day, the 28th, Holy Innocents' Day, he wrote to me that they were carrying on looking. A letter dated for Boxing Day, it were. That they were looking hard, but they found nothing. And there was no rumour of him, and no idea of a rumour. But all the countryside was agog with a Punch and Judy people, who they said were coming back this way, and may have met people on their travels, for travelling showmen meet, and had the greatest show that anyone could remember. So realistic did it seem, their puppets and all, that men seemed to shiver to see them. Well, my brother writes, he grew impatient to see the show. It was meant to come to the inn the next day, and he said, "I shall be sure to be in my room, for that is above where they will show it. I will have a fine view, not just of the Punch and the Judy, but of the puppet masters themselves." And then he writes, as an addendum, I think he must have sealed the envelope and added the note the next morning. "I had such a strange dream," he writes, "such a very strange dream last night. For I dreamt that the Punch and Judy men set up. But when they set up their booth, it was not made, as was customary, of silk, crimson and silver, but bone. And that their Punch, when he talked, looked with eyes that became more and more real. And that all his victims, be it Judy or the policeman, were like little skulls, as if they were made from old bones of children or shrunken somehow. And of how, when they come at last to that terrifying scene, where Punch fights the hangman, but gets to hang Mr. Kedge. That was so realistic, he says in his dream. He could not believe it. And the gallows, when it was built, seemed high. And all the people who came seemed to be so many dead, watching Mr. Kedge and Punch wrestle upon the lip of the gallows. And suddenly, Punch won. And how he hung Mr. Kedge. How the mask over the head of the hanged man looked so realistic. Of how he struggled. Of how the mask slipped up, and for but a moment you saw that Mr. Kedge, as hung, was wearing dog collar and bands, as only my Uncle Henry would. And then my brother said, and then I woke up. I do not know what this dream portends. I don't pretend to know. And I worried for him. I worried for him alone in the cold and the mud, for though the snow was now melting, he had spent a joyless Christmas, and perhaps would spend a joyless New Year. It was the next day, the 29th, that the final letter came. It was dated for the 27th, and it said, "We found our Uncle Henry. He is dead, of course, but in circumstances I could not believe." And he writes, "We looked all morning with the dogs but for Uncle Henry, but found him not at all. It seemed hopeless. So I gave up, and having myself a good beer, I sat upon my window and watched the Punch and Judy men set up. Now, after my dream of the last night, you might have wondered at it, but truth be said, I wanted to see if their booth was made of bone. I could have laughed for joy when I saw it so traditional, all red and silver, silk, utterly lovely. And the two showmen showed their Punch and Judy before the show began, and they were quintessential 17th century Venetian, utterly beautiful. The Punch could have passed for El Vapo, and Judy, oh, she was a work of art with a frozen white face and jewel eyes, really beautiful. And the crocodile was more like a dragon, with long wings and fierce teeth, and it moved carefully, articulated. It was a joy to watch it fight Punch, and a joy to see him, like some latter-day St. George, kill the dragon. But I was positioned, when the show really began, favourably, because I could look down in the booths, and I laughed and I giggled to watch how the men laboured backwards and forwards with their puppets to bring them up. But as the show went on, snow began to fall again, a little, and the sky seemed to grow darker. And so I'm not entirely certain, but looking down in the booth, I seemed to see, looking up at me, a pale face. And it seemed to me there was a third man in the booth, and that the puppeteers, intent upon their show, were even more intent on ignoring the fact, for the man stood behind them in the little booth, half in, perhaps half out, but I could not see his body outside. He was wearing black clothes, and I had almost a hint of a dog collar. And as the show went on, he stood up behind them, and I got the feeling he was moving his hands backwards and forwards, as if he was the puppet master, and the two showmen were but his puppets. And then there came to that dread scene. They had raised the gallows high, and they had got Mr. Kedge ready to be hung by Punch, and all of a sudden, the man, if that was what it was, who was in the booth, raised up his two hands, and the two showmen rose up and seemed by some kind of strange vision to be attached for a moment to the gallows, the puppet gallows, until the booth fell down, and the two showmen, 1, 2, streaked across the countryside. And to me and to those that saw, it seemed they were followed by a man in black with white bands. Well, we ran as fast as we could, chasing them, I clattering down the stairs and herring out after the rest. Like some wild chase we ran across 3 fields, until we came to a clay pit that we were sure we had looked at to find my Uncle Henry, and not found him. And as we came up to the field before the pit, we saw 3 figures run over its brink, and 2 fall, and 1 fade into the clouds. Well, we came up, and there were the showmen, their necks broken, clean by the drop. And near them, they would have been hidden, unless we were looking for bodies, I suppose. There was a little scrap of fabric, buried under rock and clay. And we dug up the fabric, and there was Henry's body. His neck had been broken some days before, as if by a running noose. Well, do not, of course, tell the children about it, and I suppose we will discuss it when I see you, which will be soon now. For I will not linger here. The coroner has been called. They will not bury him for a while, and I will visit you before then. And so my brother came, and needed to be calmed down. He would scream at night so often. We would sit up with him. But good port and good sense and good common ideas saw him through. And we never found out anything more. But then again, I'm not sure I wanted to in the end.